Hi, I'm Dr. Robin, and I love answering questions. So current students at Dr. Robin School can submit their questions directly in the curriculum, and I will answer them here. Today's question is from Anne, who wants to know how long someone can survive with a ruptured appendix. Now, this is a tricky question to answer because we don't leave people with ruptured appendixes to see how long they survive. Of course, before they had any modern treatments, people either survived or they didn't. But there was also a lot of other stuff going on. So people also didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have surgery, they didn't have necessarily as good nutrition as we do now. They didn't have things like vaccines to prevent them from getting other kinds of illnesses. So there were a lot of complicating factors. But back then, people either survived or they didn't. When my grandma was a little girl, they didn't even have antibiotics yet. But nowadays, people are going to get medical care as quickly as possible because it's extremely painful. So I'm going to tell you a story about one of my patients, which is the only time I've been able to see how long someone can survive with a ruptured appendix. And it's an unusual situation. So most of us have what's called interception, a sense of what's going on inside our bellies and inside of our bodies. So you can feel if you need to pee or poop or barf or whatever it is that's happening. And it can be really annoying sometimes. I mean, I get a lot of stomach aches. I don't know if you've ever had a tummy ache for like no reason at all. I do that. I also can feel nauseous or whatever, just because my body is messing with me. It's not fun. But ever since this happened with my patient, I have been so grateful that I get belly aches because this patient did not. So what happened to my patient before we knew each other was that they had just some weird pains in their bellies. It didn't feel quite right, but nothing specific. They didn't feel great. They didn't feel like eating, but they didn't feel super sick. They felt maybe a little bit feverish, but were otherwise fine. And so they got in a car and drove all the way across the country to visit their mother. This was a 2.5-day drive. When my patient got to their mother's house in New York, which is like the opposite end of the country from where I am, their mother took one look at them and said, "We're taking you to the hospital." And you know mothers, they worry about their kids, but this time the mom was right. So when my patient arrived at the hospital, it turns out that they had a ruptured appendix. And it probably ruptured quite a long time ago because by the time they got to the emergency room, their belly was completely full of, well, poop and bacteria and all the stuff that comes out when you have a ruptured appendix. And so it had been going on for quite a while. And that whole drive, they'd been sitting there with this entire belly full of poop and bacteria and stuff. And so they needed to go to the hospital for quite a big deal. And when they got there, they were taken for emergency surgery. They cleaned that all out. Now, the way they clean that out is they have kind of like a vacuum cleaner, only for human stuff. It has this long flat piece with lots of little holes. The reason why that's important is you don't want to accidentally like suck up against someone's organ. And so instead, by having this really long flat piece with lots of holes all the way along it, then they can kind of just put it in there. It'll suck on things, but if it pulls up against an organ, then it won't suck against that organ. It'll just suck through one of the other holes. It's a pretty cool little trick. So anyhow, what they do is they suck out what they can, and then they take like water with antibiotics and pour it all over everything, and then suck that all out, and then pour in more water and antibiotics and suck that all out. And they kept doing that until they got it all clean. So once it was all completely clean, then they put in a drain. Now, normally you don't have a drain when you're done with surgery. Sometimes, but not normally. So what a drain in a person is kind of the same as a drain in your house. So, you know, if there's a drain at the bottom of your sink or a drain at the bottom of your bathtub, well, they put a drain in the bottom, well, not the bottom, but the lower part of my patient. So down at the very bottom of their belly on the front, at the end of the incision, they just put in a little drain that would, as any other liquid came out, would just kind of drain out. So that did two things. One is they could see if there was any more, you know, anything. But two, it also made sure that that didn't stay in there. And of course, they did close up the hole where the appendix used to be. But my patient was in the hospital for quite a while. And when they were all done being in the hospital, they'd been in the ICU for a couple weeks. And they would not let my patient leave the hospital until they had a doctor to follow up with. Well, my patient didn't think they had any health problems, didn't think they needed a doctor, so didn't have one. which is how I met my patient, is a friend of mine called me and said, so I have this friend and they're in New York and they're not allowed to come home until they have a doctor. Could you take them as a patient? And I was like, sure for you, but what's going on? Because without, any details, why would someone not be allowed to come home without a doctor? So that's when I got the whole story. Well, it turns out this patient did not have any interception to speak of. They'd never had a tummy ache before. They never really noticed anything going on in their belly. They didn't feel hungry, and they didn't notice when they were about to throw up, and they didn't notice when they had appendicitis either. So that is the only time I've ever heard of that sort of thing happening. And it's not something you need to worry about happening, I bet, because I'll bet you've had at least one tummy ache, or at least can feel if you're going to throw up or need to pee or poop or something. Well, ever since then, I have been so grateful that I can feel what's going on inside me, even if it's just a super annoying tummy ache, because at least I know that I don't have appendicitis. Now, you would know if you had appendicitis because you would get sicker and sicker. It would hurt more and more. You wouldn't be interested in eating. And in fact, it gets to the point where even just someone bumping into a chair or a bed or anything would hurt so bad, and you wouldn't be able to walk around. So you don't have to worry that that might happen to you. But it sure is interesting that it happened to somebody else. So I can't tell you how long someone can live with a ruptured appendix, but I can tell you that that particular patient lived for several days with a ruptured appendix and was just fine in the end. If you have any questions for me, you can always submit them through the curriculum, and I will answer them right here. If you're not currently a student at Dr. Robbins School, well, come check us out. Maybe you can submit your questions too.